Undercover boss saw a woman baking morning buns at 5 a.m. What he found shocked the entire company. He only meant to stop by for a simple sandwich. No announcement. No entourage. No name tag. Just a weary Tuesday morning. The rain had stopped sometime during the night. Sidewalks still slick with puddles. In his hand, an old canvas backpack. On his back, a faded jacket worn thin by years of sun. In his eyes, alert yet revealing nothing. Michael Foster, age 50, founder of the well-known Sunrise Diner chain. And today, he returned to branch 8, the very first location he and his wife built with their own hands, selling early morning coffee to factory workers. Only now, no one in that diner recognized him. He stood in line, patiently, just like any other customer. Ahead, the beeping of the register echoed rhythmically, blended with the clinking of spoons from the kitchen. The air was light with the scent of toasted bread and sausage. Then, right after the familiar ting of the cash register, came a sentence he never thought he'd hear in the very place he founded that old guy's back again. The voice was soft, but it carried across the lull between orders. No one turned their heads. But Michael heard it. Every word. Clear as day. The one who said it was one of the two girls at the counter. Dyed brown hair. Ear piercings. She glanced at him, then leaned toward her coworker and whispered, probably ordering egg sandwich again. Plain. Never tips. The other chuckled. Always sits at that same table. Even looks exhausting. Michael didn't react. Didn't step back. He simply opened the small notebook from his jacket pocket, the same kind he used years ago to track ingredient quality during morning inspections. He wrote a single-line branch: 8 evaluates customers by spending, not by presence. Behind him, an elderly woman walked in. Thin coat. Hands trembling as she opened her wallet. The cashier didn't wait for her to approach. She turned away and began pouring cold water. Michael looked up. Not because of what she did, but because of her eyes empty. As if the person in front of her didn't deserve kindness. When it was his turn, he ordered the usual egg sandwich, no onions. Black coffee. Light sugar. His voice calm. Unremarkable. The cashier frowned slightly, maybe recognizing something in his tone, but then turned away again as if already filing him under low-value guest. Michael paid in cash.
Said nothing more.
He carried his tray to the table, the small one near the east-facing window, the same table where he once mapped out his expansion plan. He set the coffee down, but didn't eat right away. Instead, he took out his phone. With a few quick taps, he connected to the remote camera system, a feature he himself had ordered installed 2 years ago. He zoomed in on the cashier station and began recording. Not just for evidence, but to listen to hear how staff spoke about customers when they thought no one was listening. Then came the twist. A man walked in wearing a suit, shoulders damp from the drizzle. He lined up like anyone else, and instantly both cashiers' voices transformed to there. Ordering today, smiles flashed. Voices sweet as syrup. Michael watched the scene. And inside him, something opened. Not because the sandwich was cooling, but because he realized the brand he built on kindness was being run by categorization. 3 minutes later, as the two girls giggled and looked his way again, bet he forgot his wallet today. Michael placed his hand on the table, took out a worn black name badge, the one he wore on opening day. No one saw it, but he knew everything had just begun to change. Michael Foster, now 50, still had something about him, even in the way he softly greeted the janitor while passing through the glass doors of Branch 8, that spoke of a man who once stood at the stove for more than a decade. No one in that diner recognized the man in the faded coat with the backpack sitting quietly by the window this morning was the very same man who once scrubbed pans, scraped grease from the grill, and mopped the floors where they now stood. 15 years ago, Sunrise Diner was nothing more than a family eatery in a southern industrial neighborhood. 1 kitchen line, 6 tables, and a hand-nailed wooden sign. Every morning, Michael woke at 4 a.m., brewed the first pot of coffee, and made the first egg sandwiches by hand. His wife Elaine manned the register, sometimes rocking their young child behind the counter. They had no staff then, only each other. And one guiding principle: every customer here must be treated like family. Then it all began to grow. Word of mouth. Community. A longtime customer invited a friend to try it. A small newspaper article about the sunrise toast doubled the weekend morning lines. Then came franchising. Then expansion. By year 10, Sunrise had 40 locations across 3 states. Michael stepped back. He no longer stood at the stove each morning. No more punching in orders, double-checking receipts, or reminding staff to wipe the counter. He believed in the model, believed in the team, and believed that the culture of kindness he and his wife built would continue to ripple outward. Until the first emails arrived. I've been a regular for 7 years, but this time a staff member made me leave the table because I was wearing work clothes. My grandma took a bit long to order, and the cashier rolled her eyes. Has the restaurant changed? The food's still great? But the feeling of being judged makes me not want to come back. At first, Michael thought they were just isolated incidents. But then the emails multiplied. Customers who knew his name, who still ordered dishes he once personally created, started writing like they were saying goodbye. That uneasy feeling followed him for weeks, until finally he knew there was only one way to find out what was truly happening. He couldn't rely on internal reports, couldn't send an assistant. He needed to see, to hear, to feel himself. One early weekday morning, the air was crisp. Mist clung softly to the car roof. Michael pulled an old cap from the drawer, the one his wife used to hand wash every week. He wore a faded jacket, unpolished shoes, and drove to branch No. 8. No announcements. No ops manager. No district lead. No filming crew like on reality shows. Just him returning as a stranger to the space he once built with his own hands. But what made Michael shudder wasn't what had visibly changed, it was the atmosphere inside. An elderly customer sat at the counter looking at the menu but never ordering. A boy in a school uniform waited behind the kitchen, eyes fixed on the pastry spinning in the oven. At the cashier station, 2 young women. Neat. Efficient. Energetic. But in their eyes, Michael saw something he had never seen before: calculation. When a middle-aged man in work gear entered, one cashier glanced sideways and muttered, "He's not gonna tip again." Then, when it was his turn, the same girl offered a half smile, same as last time's Sir Egg sandwich. No onions, no tip. That sentence, meant to be casual, was actually a mirror. It revealed something deeper. They remembered customers not to serve them better, but to judge them in advance. Michael accepted the sandwich. The coffee was a little weak. But what stuck with him wasn't the food, it was how she set the cup down fast. No eye contact. Not a word. The longer he sat, the clearer the pattern became. An elderly woman by the door was forgotten 3 times when asking for napkins. A well-dressed customer was asked, "Do you need anything else?" 3 times in 10 minutes. The tip tray was ambiguous. The cashier quickly slid cash into the drawer after each transaction, but didn't log it anywhere. And then the most shocking thing came from a photo on the wall. Near the restrooms, where few looked, hung a faded black and white image from opening day, Michael and his wife beside the first oven. In the picture, Michael beams, shirt sleeves rolled, holding a spatula. Below the photo, a nearly worn-out caption: "We serve with gratitude." Not judgment. Michael stood before that picture for a long time. Then he returned to his seat, opened his notebook, and wrote, "We still have the logo, but we've lost the spirit." The wind chime above the door gave a soft ring as the door opened. Michael stepped inside, a morning chill slipping through the folds of his jacket. The diner wasn't crowded. 3 empty tables. A group of workers eating in the far corner. Sunlight spilled softly through the fogged glass, falling onto worn wood tables dulled with time. He chose his old favorite right by the window, the one where he used to jot down recipe notes and later where his wife would sit watching customers come and go with pride in her eyes. Now it was just an old table. And he a stranger. Michael picked up the menu. Though he knew every line, every item, he pretended to scan it word by word. His finger brushed the scarred surface, each scratch a story worn by years now ignored by eyes too rushed to notice. A soft voice echoed, barely audible, but to the man who once owned this space, each syllable landed as sharply as a knife carving into wood. There goes that old sandwich guy again. Michael tilted his head slightly. Told you. Never tips. Never adds anything. Always takes that same seat. The young woman's voice, teasing in tone, faded into a mocking chuckle. The one who heard it all was the man who had paid their salaries for years. The man who built that very table. Michael Foster. He didn't react. Didn't turn around. Didn't say a word. He simply pulled a pen from his coat pocket and made a small mark on the edge of his notebook. The cashier walked up to the counter. Her face held that rehearsed smile, stiff, well-pitched, but lacking any real care. What would you like today, sir? The usual, Michael replied, eyes still on the menu. Egg sandwich, no onions, he nodded. For here or to go for here? She turned away. But just before leaving, she tossed a comment over her shoulder, always the same table who, Michael heard every word. But he showed no reaction. No frown. No withdrawal of his order. Because he wasn't here for breakfast. He was observing. The sandwich arrived within minutes. A round plate.
Slightly crumpled paper lining.
Cut diagonally just as per standard. But as the server placed it on the table, Michael noticed something off. No enjoy your meal. No eye contact. No trace of the service culture he once taught during early morning meetings where he reminded his team customers don't just pay for food. They pay to feel seen. Michael took a bite, chewed slowly, but his eyes never left the counter. An elderly woman had just walked in, hands trembling, clutching a fabric bag with her medication. She asked something to the second cashier, a woman in uniform, fitted neatly Bluetooth headset around her neck. The girl didn't lift her eyes. She replied curtly, then turned to her coworker and sighed this one again. Probably gonna ask for a free swap. Michael saw the old woman's eyes, a flicker of confusion, then a quiet, resigned smile as if she was used to being treated like an inconvenience. That's when Michael knew this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a trend. A new service culture had crept into the system he built, one that didn't root in kindness, but an assumption that customers had to earn basic respect. And he, playing the role of the old man who doesn't tip or upsell, was now the most accurate gauge of what that culture had become. Once again, he marked the edge of his notebook. The next emotional drop didn't come from an action, but from a glance. From a new hire who had just started her shift. A girl around 18, apron still crisp, came over to wipe the table next to him. Noticing Michael sitting alone, she gently bowed her head and said softly, I can bring you more napkins if you need, sir. She didn't know who he was.
She hadn't been warned by colleagues.
But in her eyes was something he once saw in every Sunrise employee long ago, pride in their work. And that made Michael pause. Not from emotion, but because he realized the old flame still existed. But it was slowly being smothered by the very people who were trusted to keep it burning. Michael picked up his phone, pretended to scroll the web. In truth, he was accessing the internal system, checking the branch profile. Branch manager Brenda Cole. Former assistant manager at Branch 4, transferred to this new role 8 months ago. Her file read highly proactive. Adapts well under pressure. But there hadn't been a single performance review in the last 6 months. Michael closed the phone. He didn't need more data. Because in just 20 minutes, he had seen enough, heard enough, and felt enough to know this deviation wasn't caused by one person. It was the sign of a system that had started to go off course. And it began with compromise. Compromise in judging people by their receipt total. Compromise in treating regulars as burdens. Compromise in showing apathy justified by work pressure. Michael looked at the sandwich plate. The other half remained untouched. But he wasn't hungry anymore. He stood up, left a $20 bill on the table. Not as a tip, but as a test to see what they'd do with it. Michael stayed seated, half a sandwich untouched, his hand resting lightly on the closed notebook. But his eyes were opening a quiet investigation. He saw more clearly than any security camera. At the corner table to the left, an elderly man had dropped his napkin. He bent to retrieve it, but his back was too stiff. A staff member walked past, saw it, and kept walking. No words. No gesture. As if the napkin didn't exist. 2 minutes later, a young man walked in wearing a designer hoodie, phone to his ear, didn't glance at the menu. Instantly, one of the two cashiers stepped out from behind the counter.
Smiling.
Her voice noticeably sweeter. "Hi there, would you like this table? We've got fresh pastries." "I saved a sandwich just for you." Michael tilted his head, exhaled slowly. Not out of envy, but because he had just witnessed an inverted value system where looks determined service, not character nor loyalty. An older customer was ignored. A high-spending youth was courted. And the worst part, the part that kept him seated for a long while, was when that same cashier leaned toward her colleague and whispered, "Table 3 guy still didn't tip."
Same every day.
Probably thinks being old means people have to be nice to him. They laughed. But Michael didn't. He stood up, walked toward the restroom like any regular customer. But he didn't turn right. He curved around the counter down the narrow hallway, once the main kitchen, now converted into a storeroom and staff lounge. The door wasn't locked. A whiff of stale frying oil lingered. A faint mouse click echoed. He paused. In the small room at the end of the hall, the glow of a computer screen lit a familiar face. Brenda Cole, branch manager, sat at the desk, mouse sliding across frames in the internal surveillance software. The cameras were replaying clips not to detect theft, but to tag customer faces. Michael stood silently behind the door, no more than 1 step away from her. On the screen was the interface REVIEWLOGPRIORITIZECADCUSTOMERS. A table appeared with notes next to each name, didn't tip twice. Sat for 1 hour, 20 minutes, didn't order extra. Discount requested, free iced tea coupon. And then Michael saw a familiar name. The very last entry. Mitchell Harold, 82 years old. Once honored as a loyal customer in the A Coffee Every Morning program. Note, hasn't ordered in the last 3 visits. Suggest removing from benefits. It felt like someone clenched his chest. Not because Harold was an acquaintance, but because Harold was the man who once told him the story about his late wife. How she had passed. And every morning he came to Sunrise to sit in the same corner she once did. He didn't come to eat. He came to remember. And now he was removed from the loyalty program for not placing an order. Michael stepped back.
Heart racing.
Brenda chuckled softly, finished her note, then mumbled, "Time is money." These people just don't get that. That sentence, light as breath, landed on Michael's chest like a stone. He understood why older customers had slowly disappeared. Understood why the kindness that once defined Sunrise was now being eroded bit by bit. Understood why he, a man in a faded coat, had been whispered about behind his back. Because they, the ones entrusted with power, had forgotten who Sunrise Diner was created for. And they didn't know the man standing just behind that door was not some outdated old customer. He was the one who built the very system they were now exploiting. Michael turned, took out his phone, dialed a familiar number. Elaine's voice, chief operating officer, answered instantly. "Michael," he spoke softly, but with certainty, "call all district managers. This afternoon. Online. No heads up." "What's going on?" "Something very small, but enough to make Sunrise look in the mirror." He hung up, eyes fixed on the old poster high up on the wall. Still the same slogan, "We don't sell food. We serve kindness." A slogan. Now a bitter irony. Michael walked back to his table. The sandwich had gone cold, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he looked toward the counter where the 2 cashiers were still chatting and laughing. He saw the eyes of the young girl, the one who had greeted him kindly that morning, watching him. She tilted her head slightly. Michael smiled. Not as a gesture of politeness, but so she would know kindness sometimes is simply keeping your gaze steady while others look away. The back kitchen door closed gently like a quiet period, but at the same time, it marked the beginning of something new. Michael Foster stepped into the half-crowded, half-quiet room of the late morning rush. The smell of warm butter, the sound of the toaster steam rising from the espresso machine, everything operated as if it were just another Tuesday. But something had changed. The man with salt and pepper hair and a faded coat stood upright. He removed his cap, took off his round glasses. Every gaze turned toward him, confused. Shocked? No one understood what was happening. No one knew exactly who the man before them was. Until Michael quietly spoke, "I'm Michael Foster, founder of Sunrise Diner." A metal spoon dropped. One of the two cashiers had dropped it. It struck the tiled floor with a sharp clang like a confession that didn't need words. Brenda, the branch manager, had just walked out from the kitchen. Her face had lost all color. "Sir, we didn't know you were coming today." That sentence, rather than explaining, sounded like a weak excuse. Michael didn't get angry. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then raised the screen. Audio began to play. There goes the old man again, never tips. Never orders extra, always sits at that same table. There was no background music. No effects. Just a voice, clear. Call. Like the morning wind. The entire diner fell silent. No one moved. No one dared breathe. After 13 seconds of silence, Michael scanned the room. From the giggling cashier to the busser quietly wiping trays. Then he asked, not loudly, but with words that cut to the heart, "Who among you believes this is how a brand should treat its customers?" The room froze in stillness. No hands went up. No one dared meet his gaze. A young busgirl, maybe in her 20s, still clutching a cleaning rag, lifted her head, trembling. "I'm sorry, I think maybe people forgot what Sunrise was built on." Michael looked at her. In his eyes, there wasn't approval. There was sorrow for a young person who had to speak truth while the others kept hiding. He nodded gently. "Thank you." Then he turned to Brenda. "I've reviewed the full system log." Brenda swallowed hard. Sweat glistened at her temples. Michael continued, "I saw that Harold Mitchell was removed from the loyalty program just because he didn't order when sitting alone in the morning." Brenda muttered, "He takes up a seat and he usually sits too long." Michael cut her off, voice still calm but firm. "He sits at the same table his wife used to sit at. She passed away last year. Every morning he comes here not to eat, but to remember." An emotional drop crashed into the room, the kind that dries out your throat like desert wind. A soft sob came from the far corner. A young male employee, eyes reddened. Michael looked across the entire staff, all of them silent now, face to face with the moral mirror of the brand. Then he pulled a folder from his coat pocket. "This is a list of 18 employees flagged for internal complaints and negative customer feedback in the past 3 months. Your names weren't added because I needed to see for myself." He flipped open the first page. Page 1, Brenda Cole. Page 2, Carla Cashier. Page 3, Danny, the one tagging customers on camera. Michael closed the folder. Starting now, the entire room held its breath. "I am temporarily suspending anyone directly involved in discriminatory behavior, manipulation of the loyalty system, and actions that diminished customer dignity." Brenda's hand trembled. She tried to speak, but Michael raised a hand, signaling her to stop.
Sunrise Diner was never meant to be perfect.
"But we took pride in being simple and kind. You turned that into a short-term advantage and traded it away for a few free minutes, a few extra dollars in sales. That's too high a price." A young employee near the kitchen, his face still boyish, suddenly spoke. I didn't know about Mr. Mitchell. If I had, I wouldn't have ignored his table." Michael looked at him gently. "You didn't do wrong. But now you know, and from now on it won't happen again." He pulled a pen from his breast pocket, scribbled quickly on a sheet of paper, then handed it to Elaine, who was on video call from the office. Lock this branch's access to the loyalty system. There will be a full audit and individual interviews with each staff member so that those who still carry kindness have a chance to stay. A new kind of air filled the room. Not power, but fairness manifested. Right in the middle of what seemed like just another Tuesday morning. That afternoon, the branch sign still glowed brightly Sunrise Diner Branch 1. But inside, everything had changed. The two cashiers, Carla and Maya, were asked to pack up their belongings and leave their shift immediately. No shouting, no accusations, but no more room to disguise their habitual disrespect as just part of the job. Branch manager Brenda was reassigned to the internal auditing department, where she would no longer have direct access to customers, at least for the next 12 months. But the biggest change wasn't in the suspension list. It was the sheet of paper taped to the center of the register where every eye had to pass before making a payment. Every customer deserves respect, regardless of age, clothing, or how much they spend. It wasn't in bold type. It wasn't a symbolic policy. It was a commitment handwritten by Michael Foster himself, signed at the bottom with the same slanted script he'd used during Sunrise's earliest days. The first emotional drop came when an elderly customer walked in during late afternoon, shuffling in, slowly clutching a faded cloth bag. He used to be ignored. Today, a new employee, hair, neatly tied uniform, still crisp, stepped up, bowed gently, and opened the door for him.
Not because he carried a thick wallet,
but because he was a guest. The old wooden table near the window where Michael once sat every morning checking deliveries, sipping strong black coffee, was now freshly polished. On its surface, a small bronze plaque shone brightly, Founder's Table for values that never go out of style. The whole space grew quiet. A staff member mid-wipe paused after reading it. He wasn't born when Sunrise was still just a family-run diner. But somehow on that particular afternoon, he understood more deeply where he was working. At headquarters, an internal memo was sent to all 40 branches starting today. We no longer measure customers by receipts. We measure ourselves by how we make them feel. Michael didn't stay long at the diner. Once everything was handed off to the new leadership team, he quietly walked away. On his way out, he paused for a few seconds. Through the clear, thick glass, he saw the very scene he had dreamed of for 15 years, a small but warm space. A server bowing slightly with gratitude as they returned change. An elderly guest welcomed without hurry, without judgment, and a sandwich being served hot, just like the old order, with a gentle reminder, if you need anything else, just call me. I'll be around. No explanations. No apologies. Only action and change. The door creaked open. Morning sunlight poured in. Michael stepped outside holding his old notebook, the one where he had written his first line after being dismissed, judged by appearance, forgotten by system. And now he added a new line, the ink more subdued but clearer than ever remembered through kindness. A passerby stopped and asked, "You just came from Sunrise?" Was the food good? Michael smiled, a quiet smile, not the kind worn in investor meetings. He replied, "The food is still the same, only today the diner listened." And then he walked away, no title, no introduction. But behind him, he left a place that had truly come back to life through the simplest thing of all, kindness.